He studied crime for a living. He wrote academic papers on how killers get caught. He understood forensics. He understood DNA evidence. He understood how surveillance cameras work. He understood how cell phones can be tracked. He knew all of it, every single detail. And then he killed 4 people. Bryan Kohberger was a 28-year-old PhD student in criminal justice at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. He was not a dropout. He was not a failure. He was an academic, a researcher, someone who had dedicated years of his life to understanding the psychology and science of criminal behavior. He had written papers, attended lectures, studied the methodology that law enforcement uses to identify, track, and prosecute killers. And on the night of November 13, 2022, he drove 10 miles across the state border into Moscow, Idaho, in a house, and killed 4 university students in their sleep. When he left that house before dawn, his car had been stripped almost completely clean. He believed he had gotten away with it. He hadn't, because buried inside a bag of household trash, sitting on a quiet Pennsylvania street at 2 o'clock in the morning, was a single-use Q-tip, a cotton swab, the kind you find in any bathroom in any house in any country in the world. That Q-tip had been used by Kohberger's father, and the DNA it carried would become the chain that connected Bryan Kohberger to the most shocking murder case in Idaho's modern history. This is the full story of what happened on that night, how investigators found him, and what was said in that courtroom when it was all finally over. And I will warn you now, by the time this video ends, you will still have questions, because some of the most important answers in this case have never been made public. Stay with me. Before we talk about Bryan Kohberger, I want to talk about the 4 people whose lives he took. Because everything that happened, the investigation, the arrest, the trial, the sentencing, every single part of the story exists because of them. Madison Mogen was 21 years old. She was a junior at the University of Idaho studying marketing. The people who knew Madison describe her the same way every time. Warm. Genuinely, effortlessly warm. The kind of person who remembered your birthday, who showed up when you were struggling, who made any room feel better just by walking into it. She was building a future. She had a plan. She had no idea that plan had already been decided for her. Kaylee Goncalves was also 21. She and Madison had been best friends for years. The kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences without thinking about it. They had chosen to live together in that house. They had their whole lives mapped out together. Kaylee's family has described her as fierce, protective of the people she loved, and full of ambition. Xana Kernodle was 20, also studying marketing. Her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, had come to stay that weekend. Ethan was also 20. He was one of 3, a triplet. His brother and sister woke up the next morning to news that would change the shape of their entire family forever. Nobody in that family will ever be the same. 4 young people, 4 futures. One house on a quiet street in a small Idaho town where nothing like this had ever happened before. The house at 1122 King Road sat in a residential neighborhood close to University of Idaho campus in Moscow, Idaho. Moscow is a small farming community. The kind of place where people know their neighbors, where students feel safe walking home after dark, where nobody locks their doors because nobody ever needs to. The town had not recorded a single homicide in nearly 5 years before that night. On the evening of November 12th, Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan had been out, a normal Saturday night for college students. They came home. They wound down. Most of them went to sleep, but Xana was still awake downstairs. She had placed a DoorDash food order. It arrived at roughly 4 in the morning, a late-night delivery, the most ordinary thing in the world. She had no idea that outside, not far away, a white car was parked in the dark, and the man sitting inside it had been to this street before, many times before. It is 3 a.m. on November 13th, 2022. Bryan Kohberger's phone records would later reveal something that made investigators stop cold. His device had pinged cell towers in the immediate area of 1122 King Road, not once, not twice, but 23 separate times in the months before that night. Between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., he had driven past this house in the dark, over and over again for months. He knew the layout. He knew the street. He knew exactly where to park, so he would not be seen. He had planned this with the precision of someone who had spent years studying how killers get caught, and had spent just as long making sure he would not be one of them. At some point before 4:19 a.m., he approaches the back of the house. There is a sliding glass door. It is not properly secured. He enters. He moves to the ground floor in complete darkness. No lights, no noise. He goes upstairs. He enters the first room. Madison and Kaylee are both there. He kills them with a large fixed-blade knife. And as he prepares to leave that room, he does something that will come to define the entire investigation. He leaves the knife sheath on the bed, the leather cover for his blade, right there, next to Madison's body, with his DNA on it. He either does not notice, or he panics, or he simply does not think it matters. Whatever the reason, that decision will cost him everything. He moves back downstairs. Xana is there. Perhaps she has heard something. Perhaps she is simply walking back from the front door with her food delivery. We do not know exactly what happened in that moment. What we know is that Kohberger kills her too, and then he moves into her bedroom, where Ethan Chapin is asleep, and he kills Ethan as well, 4 people, in their own home, on a Saturday night. But there are 2 more people in that house. Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk are both asleep in their rooms. Dylan wakes up. She hears something, a sound she later describes as crying. She opens her bedroom door, just slightly, and looks out into the hallway. And she sees him, a tall figure, dressed entirely in black, a black ski mask covering his face. She can see his eyebrows, thick and dark, above the mask. He is walking directly toward her. Dylan freezes. She cannot move. She cannot speak. The figure reaches her, looks at her, and then walks straight past her without stopping. He moves to the sliding glass door at the back of the house, pushes it open, and steps out into the darkness. He is gone. Dylan goes back to her room. She locks the door. She is in shock. She does not yet understand what has happened in the rooms around her. She will not fully understand for hours. At approximately 4:20 a.m., a surveillance camera on a neighboring property captures a white Hyundai Elantra leaving the area at high speed, almost losing control as it takes a corner too fast. The car disappears into the early morning darkness heading east. Kohberger drives across the state line back to Pullman, Washington. He is home before 5:30 a.m. He parks. He goes inside, and he begins to clean. At 11:58 a.m. that same morning, Sunday, November 13th, 2022, a 911 call is placed from 1122 King Road. When officers arrive, they find Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, all 4 of them gone. Moscow, Idaho's first homicides in 5 years. 4 of them at once. In a student house on a quiet street where nobody ever locked their doors. And the man who did it was 45 minutes away, scrubbing his apartment. What followed was the largest criminal investigation in the history of the state of Idaho. The FBI, Idaho State Police, and local law enforcement launched a joint operation involving hundreds of investigators. Thousands of tips flooded in from across the country. The campus was shaken. The town was shaken. The entire country was watching. And for weeks, almost nothing concrete came back. Kohberger had been thorough. His apartment had been stripped down to bare walls. His car had been disassembled from the inside. Every surface scrubbed, every fiber removed. He had deleted purchase records. He had been careful in ways that only someone with deep knowledge of forensic investigation would think to be. But he had left the knife sheath. That single piece of leather, recovered from the bed next to Madison Mogen's body, was sent to the Idaho State Police Forensics Laboratory. When scientists tested it, they extracted a full DNA profile. Single source. 1 male. Not in any existing criminal database. Unknown. But here is where the science becomes extraordinary. Forensic genealogy, the same technique that had been used to identify the Golden State Killer in 2018, was brought in. Investigators uploaded the unknown DNA profile to a public genealogy database. The search returned a partial match, not to Kohberger directly, but to a male relative of his who had previously submitted their DNA to a consumer ancestry website. That partial match told investigators something extremely specific. The person whose DNA was on that knife sheath was a close male relative of the person in the database. A son, a brother, a nephew. Investigators built out a full family tree. They cross-referenced it with everything they had. The white Hyundai Elantra on the surveillance footage, the cell phone tower data, placing a device near the house 23 times before the murders, the proximity of Washington State University to Moscow, Idaho. Bryan Kohberger's name came up. A 28-year-old PhD student in criminal justice, living 10 miles from the crime scene, driving a white Hyundai Elantra, with no verified alibi for the night of November 13th. But they could not arrest him on a genealogy match alone. They needed his DNA directly, and they needed to get it without alerting him. Kohberger had gone home to his parents' house in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, for the Christmas holidays. Investigators watched and waited. On the night of December 27, 2022, working alongside the local sanitation department, FBI agents conducted what is legally known as a trash pull. They waited for the Kohberger family to put their rubbish out for collection. In the early hours of the morning, while the street was quiet and dark, they retrieved the garbage bags from outside the house and transported them directly to the Idaho State Forensics Laboratory. Inside one of those bags, a single-use Q-tip, a cotton swab that had been used by Kohberger's father and discarded in the normal course of daily life, with no idea that it was about to become one of the most consequential pieces of evidence in an American murder trial. The laboratory extracted the DNA from that Q-tip. They compared it to the unknown profile from a knife sheath. The DNA on the knife sheath belonged to the biological son of the man who had used that Q-tip. Bryan Kohberger's father's DNA confirmed that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was on the murder weapon sheath. A judge signed the arrest warrant the same day. On December 30th, 2022, exactly 47 days after the murders, law enforcement moved on the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody at his parents' house. He was calm during the arrest according to officers present. He was extradited to Idaho and formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. When investigators executed search warrants on his apartment and his vehicle, they found what they expected: almost nothing. His apartment was described by the lead prosecutor as Spartan. Bare walls, no personal items. Every surface had been cleaned to a forensic standard. The inside of his car had been so thoroughly scrubbed it was described as essentially disassembled. He had tried to delete his Amazon purchase history, but investigators recovered the records. He had purchased the exact knife and sheath used in the murders. He had switched his vehicle registration from Pennsylvania plates, which do not require a front license plate, to Washington state plates, specifically to reduce his car's visibility on surveillance cameras. He had thought about every detail, except for a used Q-tip in a rubbish bag on a Pennsylvania street. Bryan Kohberger's trial was scheduled for August 2025. It was expected to be one of the most followed criminal trials in recent American history, a case with overwhelming forensic evidence, a suspect who had studied criminal justice, and 4 grieving families waiting for the full truth to come out in open court. That trial never happened. On July 2nd, 2025, Bryan Kohberger entered a plea of guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. The terms of the deal were straightforward. In exchange for his guilty plea, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty. He stood before the judge and answered every question in a flat, measured tone. Those who were in the courtroom described his demeanor the same way: blank, controlled, almost entirely without emotion. He waived his right to appeal. He waived his right to challenge his sentence. He gave up everything, including any future opportunity to speak publicly about his reasons, his motive, or what was going through his mind on the night of November 13th, 2022. On July 23rd, 2025, Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms in prison with no possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for the burglary charge, and fines totaling $270,000. The victims' families were given the opportunity to speak at sentencing. For some, the plea deal brought a form of relief, an end to the uncertainty of a long trial, and the beginning of whatever healing looks like after something like this. But Kaylee Goncalves' family could not accept it. Her father refused to attend the sentencing at all. Her younger sister Aubrey, just 18 years old, stood up in that courtroom and spoke. She looked in the direction of Bryan Kohberger, and she said something that stopped the room. She said that Bryan Kohberger, sitting in his prison cell, would still get to wake up every morning, still get to speak, still get to think, still get to exist in the world in some form. Her sister could not. Her sister had been silenced on a November night at 21 years old, and she would never speak again. Aubrey was 18 years old when she said that. Think about that for a moment. Here is what I keep coming back to when I think about this case. And I have thought about it a lot. Bryan Kohberger drove to the street where his victims lived 23 separate times in the months before he killed them. 23 times. In the dark, between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. He sat outside that house. He watched it. He planned. And yet investigators and prosecutors have confirmed there is no evidence that Bryan Kohberger had ever had any direct contact with Madison, Kaylee, Xana, or Ethan. They did not know him. He did not know them. No shared classes. No social connections. Nothing. So what was it? Why that house? Why those 4 people out of the thousands of students on that campus? We were supposed to find out at trial. The prosecution had evidence about motive that was never publicly presented because Kohberger took the plea deal before the trial began. Some of those records are still sealed. The full picture of why Bryan Kohberger chose 1122 King Road may never be made public, and that is what stays with me. A PhD student who spent years studying criminal behavior, who understood exactly how investigators work, who cleaned his apartment to forensic standards, switched his license plates, deleted his purchase history, drove with a ski mask in his car. That level of planning requires a reason, a specific, calculated reason. And he is the only person alive who knows what it was. He will spend the rest of his life in a cell, knowing something that 4 families will never be told. I want to know what you think. Why do you believe he chose that house? Do you think investigators know the motive and have chosen not to release it publicly? Do you think we will ever know the full truth? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I respond. If you stayed with me to the end of this video, thank you, genuinely. It means a lot that you took the time to learn the story of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They deserve better than what happened to them. The least we can do is remember who they were. If you want to go deeper into cases like this one, cases where the evidence was extraordinary, where the justice system was tested, and where the questions outlast a verdict, subscribe and hit the bell. I post a new case every single week. I will see you in the next one.